Joining us now to discuss this, the peril that lies ahead and the urge and the lurch to globalism, Pat Buchanan, conservative commentator, columnist, author. There's no one else like him. Pat Buchanan. Hey, Pat, how are you?
Doing fine, Laura. How are you?
I'm very well. So what about this Macron-Trump friendship?
I think what Macron is doing is something very wise. He's realized America's got a different kind of leader, a very nationalistic leader, flamboyant individual, but that the relationship between France, which actually is our oldest ally, and the United States is crucial to France, and he's going to do his best to get along and communicate with President Trump and have good relations with him and try to work with him. And his immediate objective, I think, is to try to persuade President Trump not to crash out of the Iran nuclear deal. I think that's why he's over here, one of the reasons. And I think it's why Angela Merkel's coming on Friday.
Well, the concern that a lot of us have who are seeing what this open borders disaster has wrought, and, of course, these trade deals that Trump's trying to redo and refashion, is that someone like Macron, he doesn't understand, or he doesn't care to understand. This is through a translator, Pat, what he said just now about an hour ago, standing side by side with the president. Let's listen.
It is together that we can resist the rise of aggressive nationalisms that deny our history and divide the world. It is together that we will build a new, strong multilateralism that defends pluralism and democracy in the face of ill winds.
The nationalism, very concerned about the rise of nationalism in France, given the fact that we have the Hungarian president who said, look, we don't want our culture destroyed. We have this violence in the Greek island of Lesbos, where we have all these migrants who've gone through Turkey and have been camped out there for 2 years, just destroying, frankly, much of the beauty of Greece, and the people there are suffering.
I think Mr. Macron is utterly out of touch. He's trying to create an artificial nationalism out of Europe in the European Union. But nobody's going to fight, bleed, or die for the European Union. People reject it as an invasion of their sovereignty and independence more and more. And as you mentioned, what we see in Hungary and in Poland is the desire to maintain their national identity, ethnic identity, historical identity, religious identity as who and what they are. Now, if the EU is simply a free trade agreement or a trade agreement, fine. But if it's to create some transnational institution, some new identity, that can only be done by the annihilation, eventually, of the old identity which Poland and Hungary are trying to preserve. You know, Americans, Laura, we speak of the wonderful diversity that's going to be here when everyone is a minority, racially, ethnically, culturally, every other way. But that kind of diversity which we celebrate would mean the death of Hungary as it exists and wishes to exist. They want to be who and what they are. And these are the most powerful forces working on peoples today, and they're in direct conflict with transnational institutions and mass immigration from other countries which are utterly different, whose people are different in their beliefs and customs and traditions.
This is something that we've talked about before, but small countries such as Hungary or Czech Republic, Poland, they're the ones really squeezed by globalization and open borders. They're really squeezed. They can't absorb this number of people. Look at what's happened to poor Greece. They can't absorb it. They don't, and the people don't want it. And people are responding, sadly, in a violent manner in some cases, because it's like, wait, this is like an invasion.
Well, it's exactly what it is. It's a massive immigrant invasion from the Arab countries, the African countries, and Islamic countries. And you got a nation like Hungary, 10 million Hungarians, overwhelmingly all of them Hungarian. If you bring in 4 or 5 million, say, Arabs or Islamic peoples, as they've got in France, Hungary ceases to be what it is and what it wants to be. It is a nation-state established for a particular people. With due respect, we can see the same situation in the battle going on in Israel. They want to be, as Bibi Netanyahu says, this is the homeland of the Jewish people. That's why they don't have immigration, or they don't want immigration of Palestinians or Africans or others there, because the country will cease to be what it was set up to be, which is what they want. And to me, these things are far more important than the small d democracy idea that we're all going to be under some global government or transnational government, which is going to rule us and make decisions from Brussels. If the Hungarian people want to establish, basically an illiberal democracy, or whatever you want to call it, the purpose of which is to preserve their nation and people and country, that's their business. And I don't know why we would want to impose something else upon them.
Well, I mean, we see the lack of, unity and assimilation here in the United States building. We're better at assimilating people than other countries, but we're beginning to see this pot is going to boil over at some point. And
well, the reason is because more and more it's been called identity politics. People are identifying themselves by their race or their ethnic group, or where they came from, their language. I mean, and when you get, let's take Hispanics coming from Mexico, I think there are 60 million Hispanics in the country, but when they're overwhelmingly Hispanic with Hispanic, language on radio and TV stations and all the rest of it, do these countries, are they really, they may be politically part of the United States of America, but are they really, if they're right along the Mexican border, and they're more Mexican than they are American? And so people are these senses of who and what we are and how we are different are very much pulling at the United States. You're exactly right. We're the most successful country like this. But one of the other examples was the USSR and the Russian Empire, and they collapsed completely along ethnic and tribal lines into 15 nations. And they could start collapsing further. The Chechens aren't Russians, the Dagestani aren't Russians, all these other groups. And you see it in Kenya. I was talking the other day. Kenya is a country, but it's also made up of three primary tribes, the Maasai, the Kikuyu, and the Luo. Barack Obama's father was a Luo. And these tribes battle for power with one another inside the countries that basically are colonies, were colonies of the British Empire. And these forces are the most powerful on earth.
We're talking to Pat Buchanan here on the Laura Ingraham Show. Pat, the Republican old guard and the globalists, some of them younger than the old guard, they're really struggling with some of the successes that Trump has managed to pull out of this very tumultuous administration. They're asked about 2020, and they stutter and stumble and, well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see because the world could look a lot different. I'm not going to say whether I'm supporting him. They fall right into the media's trap on this. People like Ron Johnson and John Cornyn from Texas even. And it really does show me that there are so many of these Republicans who still don't understand why he won in 2016. They think there's a way forward for the globalist party, and there's just not. There's no party. There's no party, Pat, for like Bill Kristol and these people like Max Boot. And that's not a Republican party. It never will be.
No, it's not anymore. They're great gold, Boot and Kristol. Of course, they're very interested in foreign policy, American interventionism, establishing democracies all over the world, small d democracies. But they put together, voting. They succeeded in Egypt and in Lebanon and in the West Bank and in Gaza. And the people elected the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, and Americans are fed up with these Middle East wars. They don't want to go democracy crusading around the world. They want to let other people govern themselves in their own way. They don't believe we have all the best ideas or that we have any right to impose them upon other peoples. And this transnational institution, the WEU, the World Trade Organization, the EU, the WTO, all of these institutions are being challenged by the forces of nationalism in the United States and elsewhere, and you really can't go backwards. I mean, the Bush Republicanism, I think, is gone. I mean, I think if they try to reestablish that, they would lose a huge slice of the party, even if they won the nomination. And the country doesn't want to go forward to that.
No, and again, they can howl at the moon all they want, but yeah.
I mean, look at Laura. This drive to get us involved in Syria and all the rest of it. Trump, whatever you say for or against him, has really plugged in to the sense of the American people that they want to start putting their own country first. Now, if we get up a big reconstruction program for Syria, say, of a couple of scores of billions of dollars and no infrastructure for the United States, that's not a saleable proposition. And people don't want our guys fighting over there. I mean, look how hard it is for them, really, to get any number of troops together to go over and try to fix that place in the Middle East, which is a disaster, all through that area. The country wants out, and Trump senses it. And some of the elites are still wedded to the old visions that date back to the last century.
Yeah, well, and acting like it's 1995 and we're dealing with like a budget surplus. I mean, they're acting like there's no this game of musical chairs we're playing with our finances is just going to end well. And meanwhile, China has its 2025 initiative, and they're getting ready to dominate in tech and everything else, and they're putting $300 billion as a down payment down for subsidies for major moves on American companies, and they're just acting like it's like 1995. Like there's no end in sight for the money.
And take a look at what are the major concern of, quote, peoples everywhere. In Europe, quite obviously, the reason why they have the rise of these right-wing populist parties and what they call illiberal parties and others breaking away is the existential threat of Europe with its declining population and small population being overwhelmed by the masses, the millions and the tens of millions who are obviously going to come pouring out of Africa. I saw, somewhere that, by Africa by the end of the century is going to have 4 billion people, and Europe's going to be down to about a fraction of that. And those folks in Europe fear for their traditional countries and their homelands being overwhelmed. What put Trump in the White House? It was the fear of the mass migration unstopped across America's southern border, the deindustrialization of America under this globalization, free trade ideology, which frankly our old friend Larry Kudlow is a prime example of. They want their own country. The founding fathers and they were totally dependent on Great Britain, and Hamilton says, we got to cut these ties, we got to build our own homes, make the clothes for our people, we got to do this, we got to have our own defense, we got to be a self-sufficient, independent nation. Political independence has got to be backed up by economic independence.
Yeah, well, I think in the end, the American people will reject